ここからは The Past, Present and Future of Entrepreneurship Education と題しまして、マーティン・トラストセンター for MIT アントレプレナーシップマネージングディレクタービル・オーレット教授による基調講演を執り行います。なお、こちらの講演は Zoom での中継となります。それではご講演に移ります。まず、QRECセンター長高田恵よりビル・オーレット教授をご紹介させていただきます。高田先生、よろしくお願いいたします。
はい、QRECのセンター長を仰せつかっております高田です。今日はこのような形でたくさんの方にお見えいただいて、またウェブでもですね多くの方に視聴いただいて本当にありがとうございます。簡単に、僕の友人のビル・オーレットを紹介をさせていただきたいと思います。最初に出会ったのは2009年、なんですけれども、先ほどロバート・ファンさんからのお話の中でありましたように、ロバート・ファンさんの命を受けまして、今の QRECを作るそのためのブループリントを作ってこいと、宿題を持って、MIT に赴いて、約半年間滞在をしました。でそこで、ちょうどビルもですね、MIT のアントレプレナーシップセンターのマネージングダイレクターという職に、確かついた直後だったんじゃないかなというふうに思います。で、毎日 MIT で、過ごしてまして、彼の講義だったりとか、それからたくさんの学生たちが彼のオフィスを訪ねて、いろいろディスカッションしている、その、姿をずっと見てきましてですね、で彼は常に、周りの人たちにエネルギーを与える、とっても素晴らしい人材なんだなという人なんだなということが大変よく分かりました。でそれ以来ですね、私自身の、ある種のロールモデルとして、彼は、前をずっと走り続けているというような状況であります。でそういうことでですね、今日こういう形で、ビルとの10年間の友情が続き、また QREC と MIT との関係がですねここまで継続して、ビルをですね基調講演者として、お迎えできるというのは大変嬉しく思っているところです。それではビルの話に、移らさせていただきたいと思います。OK, Bill, floor is yours.
Thank you, Megumi Takata-san. And first of all, let me share my slides and say, I'm sorry, I wish I could speak Japanese right now. I have not understood everything that's been said, so I might repeat some things, and for that I apologize. But I'm here, it's a great honor for me to talk to you today on the 10th anniversary of this center. I remember over 10 years ago, probably 12 years ago, when I first met Bob Wong, and he was at our center and he said, I'd like you to work with Kyushu University, and I didn't know very much about that. And it was his vision that created the center and created a working relationship with us at the Trust Center at MIT. And it has been a wonderful relationship. So thank you, Bob, for your vision. And thank you, Megumi, for your implementation of this. When Bob said we'd like someone to come and stay with you, we didn't quite know what to do because we had never done something like that before. But as a true entrepreneur, Bob said, well, let's just do it. If someone hasn't done it before, it's all the more exciting. So Megumi came and spent 4 months in Boston, and it was very cold weather. And we talked about baseball. We talked about living in the United States. We talked about living in Japan. We talked about more baseball, but most of all, we talked about entrepreneurship. And what you have today is a gem of an entrepreneurship center. And I want to talk about our philosophy as to how we think about that. But tip my hat to you at Kyushu University and QREC for what you have done, because we have learned so much from you in this partnership as well. And let me also say, over the past 14 months, we always believed that entrepreneurship was important. But over the past 14 months in COVID, it has proven that entrepreneurship is not a nice thing to teach. It is an essential thing to teach. And it's not just an essential thing to teach, it's an essential thing for us to have more and better and more connected entrepreneurs in our society. Because over the past 14 months, we have seen COVID, and we've seen it just accelerate the changes and disruptions in our society. And those people who will lead, who led during COVID-19, those people who will lead after COVID-19, because the world will just keep getting faster and faster, are entrepreneurs. And I heard some of the speakers before talk about entrepreneurial ecosystems and this concept of an entrepreneurial ecosystem. And let me just say, I'm a very simple person. When it comes to business, there's one necessary and sufficient condition to have a business. And we start this with every class, the first class of every course. We say there's one necessary and sufficient condition to have a business. And it isn't a product, it isn't an investor, it isn't a factory, it isn't raising money, it isn't a business plan, it's a paying customer. And people who want to be in business have to understand that. The single necessary and sufficient condition for a business is a paying customer. That should be at the center of everything we do. So when we talk about building an entrepreneurial society, when we talk about building an entrepreneurial ecosystem, there's one necessary and sufficient condition for that. That's entrepreneurs. And what you're doing at QREC is producing more entrepreneurs and better entrepreneurs. And that's what we need in today's society. So let me just talk about how we think and about entrepreneurship today. And then I'll talk about what the misperceptions were we had in the past. And then I'll talk about where it's going. So first of all, there was a perception at one point that can entrepreneurship be taught, or are you just born an entrepreneur? And we have shown through research that entrepreneurship can not only be taught, it can be learned. The more times you're an entrepreneur, the more likely you are to be successful. This is empirically shown through research. It's also known if you're an entrepreneur. You learn how to be a better entrepreneur. So clearly entrepreneurship can be taught. The second question then is, okay, but can everybody be an entrepreneur? Can I be an entrepreneur? And to this, I think the answer is now very, very clear as well. Everyone is born an entrepreneur. When you look at the history of mankind, people were born entrepreneurial. It is our society that has taken that entrepreneurship away. When you go back to the earliest times, you see people making things, you see people trading things, you see people providing services to other people. People were entrepreneurs because that's what they needed to do to survive. So it can be taught, and anybody can be an entrepreneur. We're born that. So how do we bring that entrepreneurship out, and how do we make it better in our students? And that's the question that we ask. And that's the question we've been addressing at Kishu University and QREC for the past 10 years, and we've been addressing at MIT for the past 50 years. Let me just bring you up to speed. If you want to solve a problem, and everyone's interested in entrepreneurship today, the first thing you have to do if you're an engineer, and we at MIT are engineers in our blood, is you have to define your terms. What do we mean by entrepreneurship? And if you go to a dictionary, you will find a description like this of entrepreneurship. It is the creation of new organizations that provide value to someone, and they capture value on the other side. It's an economic entity that when done properly, it sustains itself, because the value that it creates is such that it can extract enough value, that is a price or rent, that exceeds its cost so it can continue to exceed. That is the simple definition of entrepreneurship. An economist would give you that. I'll talk more about that at the end, how this has morphed into something more sophisticated, but let's take the basic definition. even that definition, we need to break down further to say, okay, so someone can create a new economic entity and it can be self-sustaining. That means it's the money that it brings in will exceed all the costs. The first one that we're most familiar with, and entrepreneurship is often used interchangeably with, is the term SME, small, medium enterprise. This is very common. Many of our parents have done it. We see entrepreneurs who do this all the time. This was the earliest form of entrepreneurship. It is something where someone starts a restaurant, they are a doctor, a lawyer, they provide some sort of IT services for a local community. That is an entrepreneurship. What we're going to talk about today is innovation-driven entrepreneurship, which is going beyond that. And what is the difference between innovation-driven entrepreneurship, which creates companies as well, and SME entrepreneurship, is that IDE, innovation-driven entrepreneurship, is trying to build big scalable companies like Bob Hwang did with his company. They're not just trying to build something that will be a local company. Now, there's nothing wrong with SMEs. These are very good things for an economy. They're geographically distributed and they are non-tradable jobs. But what really transforms an economy and changes and solves some of the world's most intrinsic problems, intractable problems, is IDE entrepreneurship or IDE entrepreneurs. And the difference between them is that SMEs have a local market focus, whereas IDEs have a more super regional or global focus. And to do that, they have to have innovation built into it. But let's look at the systems a little closer. If you have an SME, what you have is a system that has low inertia. By that, we mean that if you try something and cause an effect, if you push it, it will move very quickly. You don't have to wait for it to move. It doesn't have a lot of inertia. That means the delta T, the response time is very quick. If I'm a dentist and all things being equal, I want to increase my revenue, I can buy another chair, get another office, and have more customers, and maybe hire somebody else, and I'll see my revenue go up. So it won't take much time for me to know whether that's working or not. And when it does, I can see my business growing quite quickly if I make those investments. If they don't work, I can take them away. I don't need to make really big investments, but here's the trick. Here's one of the catches though. While it's low risk and I can run my experiments with rapid feedback and I can see it growing quickly, there is a cap here. And why is there a cap? Because it's a local market. But this being said, these are good businesses. I want no one to leave that. But when we look at an IDE, it has uncapped growth potential. It can become a very, very big company, hiring lots of people and selling its products around the world. But the problem is we're only looking at the far right-hand side of this curve up here. If you look right here, there's a little problem here. And that's often called the valley of death. And in this part, when you make an investment, you don't see whether it works quickly or not. You have to invest in a technology, a patent. You have to come up with a new process. You have to maybe go without paying yourself or your team for a while. You're going to have to make some significant investment here. And that causes inertia in the system. And that means it's going to take a while to see if something works. And that's very, very risky here. But the good news is, we said, if you can make it out of this and it starts growing, you have exponential growth. You can solve problems at a much higher scale than you could on the left. But you will have to get an investment here. This is not as simple as it seems, because you can make an investment, and this is a very high-risk period because you don't know if it's working or not, that it might not turn the curve and go up. And many companies die right in here because they can't get enough resources, or they deploy those resources, funds or whatever, ineffectively because the response time is so slow. What we do at MIT, and you're doing at Kishu, is focusing on how do we create these highly scalable, game-changing, companies that can create exports. And Japan has been a leader at this. When you look back in history, when you look at companies like Honda and Sony and Toyota, they are poster children of IDE. And how do we create more of those companies today? So I think it's important that I do more in the definition stage here, and then we can move forward, because I used a word called innovation. And this word innovation is often not precisely understood. When you ask people what is innovation, they will say it's something new, it's an invention. But we know this not to be true. We know this not to be true because patents cost us money. To develop technology costs us money. That is an invention, to come up with a new process. Inventions don't make us money. Innovation makes money. Innovation is where we make money. Invention costs us money. So these things, in simple mathematical terms, they can't be the same thing. Something is missing here. The units are not correct. And what is missing is this thing called commercialization. How do we take a patent, an idea, and find a customer and convince them that, and show them how they can use this to make it into an innovation that makes money for them? And entrepreneurship is this commercialization process that we as a society, certainly in the United States and the Western world, we have undervalued that, and we overvalue the invention. Even at a place like MIT, we talk at great length about technology and patents, yet history shows that those things aren't what make you money. Those don't create innovation that positively impacts the world. Only when they're commercialized do they. And this is very true when you look at businesses. When you look at Apple, they did not invent the underlying technology that allowed them to create the computer that changed the world, which was the Macintosh. Before that, it was actually the Lisa. That was created by a company called Xerox. Xerox no longer exists today. It was actually bought by a Japanese company at a very low price. Yet they invented it, but it's Apple that's a multi-trillion-dollar company today because Apple was able to commercialize this idea that Xerox came up with. And they did it again when it came to the music industry with the MP3 technology. They were very good at commercializing, whereas Fraunhofer, which came up with the MP3 patent, was not. Now, what I'm saying here is you need both because it's a product of invention and commercialization. But I'm also saying that people overvalue invention because they love patents, they get mesmerized by the technology and people with PhDs, and they undervalue commercialization. And we as a society need to put these things on more equal footing. My colleague at MIT, Bengt Holmstrom, who recently won a Nobel Prize, gave a wonderful talk at our center. It said, is disruptive technology overrated? In praise of commercialization. He actually called it in praise of imitation. And he said that 90% of the value in the world comes from imitation. People taking something that already is out there, be it at Xerox, Fraunhofer, or MySpace, as Facebook did there, and commercializing that into a new market. And you've seen this with the Chinese. They take an idea that already exists, they bring it into theirs, but they know how to commercialize it for their market. So I think this is a really important definition, that innovation equals invention times commercialization. But if I left you with that simple equation, I would not be giving you the truth, because I worked at IBM, and at IBM we had extraordinary invention, and we had extraordinary commercialization. And by that equation, then we should have come up with tremendous amounts of innovation. But in fact, we were beaten in the personal computer industry by a small company out of Texas called Compaq, which had inferior invention capability. They didn't have 1,000th of the patents that we had. They didn't have a research center like we had. They didn't have the commercialization capability that we had. We had the greatest sales force in the world, but what they had was fast clock speed. You see, you have to not only have these two things, but you have to have them working closely together so that they can iterate very, very rapidly. At IBM, it took us a year. I would see things in the marketplace. By the way, there's a movie about this called Silicon Cowboys, which you can see on Netflix. And I'm on the IBM side, and I know this very, very well. It took us a year. I would see something, I would try to get that into the product plan with the people who were developing products, and it would take me a year at best to get it in there. At Compaq, they could take something they would see in the marketplace, they got it to their invention, and they would get it back in a matter of weeks. And this ability, this what we call clock speed, of ability to iterate, is what makes innovation happen. It's what makes entrepreneurs successful. You have to move quickly. Thomas Edison, who was an inferior inventor to Nikola Tesla, but he was a superior innovator to Nikola Tesla, said, I measure innovation as the number of times I can iterate on a new idea within the first 24 hours when I have it. And that gives you a good sense of what we mean by clock speed. So this is what makes for successful entrepreneurship. We know it today. It's invention and commercialization, but the two of them working very, very rapidly together. Now, in the past, entrepreneurship had been taught in a way that was really misleading. And you see this in the movies today still. The first is, they said this entrepreneurs are mercurial individuals. If you watch the movie Steve Jobs, if you watch Social Network with Mark Zuckerberg, you would think that you have to be an individual, and an individual who's a jerk to be successful. This is not true. This is not true. Research shows that the more people you have on your team, the more likely you are to be successful, up to a certain point. Entrepreneurship is not an individual sport. It's a team sport. So we need to teach it in teams. Nothing significant gets done by one person. No matter if you're Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, you need to have a team to get things done. The second thing is, it's about what I learned in the classroom. It's about that. No, entrepreneurship is not about intelligence. It's about being really obsessed and doing one thing really, really well. Don't try to please other people. Figure out what you really, really want to do. And you want to do it for a long time. And you want to do it not just because you make money, just because you're obsessed with it. And that's more than passion. I want to know everything. An example, when I was running a company called Sensible Technologies, I'm not a particularly good mechanical engineer. I'm not a particularly good electrical engineer, as much as it hurts me to say this. I'm not a great computer scientist, better than the other things. But I understood if you want to get an answer about force feedback, you came to me because I was obsessed with learning everything and asking questions. That's what makes you a great entrepreneur. The next thing is, entrepreneurship is something that can be taught. I mentioned this. Entrepreneurs are not born, they're made. Despite what people used to believe, it is nature, it is nurture, not nature. The research shows that just because your parents are entrepreneurs doesn't make you more likely to be a successful entrepreneur. Entrepreneurship can be taught and anybody can do it. There's no gene. People say, well, entrepreneurs are successful because they love risk. Well, let me just clarify this. You have to be willing to deal with risk. That doesn't mean we like risk. There is no place in the world today, going forward, even less so, where there's no risk. What entrepreneurs do is they learn how to take smart risk. That is, they learned how to find situations, create situations where the risk is very much worth the reward. So I show this gambling example here because the MIT blackjack team, which all became entrepreneurs, which is very interesting, because they would work as a team and they would go to a casino. Now, they wouldn't play this game or they wouldn't play the one-armed bandit games. What they played was blackjack. Now, why did they play blackjack? First of all, they could affect the outcome. Second of all, the odds are pretty good for you. Third, if you count the cards, the odds flip into your favor. Now you're going to win, and you're going to win more than you're going to lose. That's good odds. But how can you count the cards? And this was the interesting thing. Everybody knew that, but they have cameras around casinos to watch very closely for people counting the cards. But what the MIT blackjack team knew, which is very interesting, is that they didn't think that women would or could count cards. So the camera people never focused on the women. And what the MIT teams would do is they'd bring in a team, and one of them would be woman, and she would count the cards and convey it back. So what's the point here is that they had information asymmetry. They had an insight that allowed them to flip the odds so that taking risk was a smart thing to do. If you couldn't count the cards, it was a dumb thing to do. But because they could have that insight to do that other people didn't have, they were taking smart risks. Now, I'm not encouraging you to do this at a casino today. They figured it out. But that's just an example of taking risk. Another thing is, I can't be an entrepreneur because entrepreneurs are so charismatic. This is fundamentally not true. You cannot sell a product based on charisma. If you sell a product based on charisma, that means your customer wakes up tomorrow and they say, why did I buy that? That person just, mesmerized me and I shouldn't have bought it. That will kill you, because the entrepreneurs live by their reputation. They live by the reputation of their product. And if someone buys your product and doesn't like that product and doesn't like your company, they are going to get online and they're going to write a bad review. And that review will kill you, because you cannot afford to be everywhere. You need to depend on your customers being your salespeople for you. The best salespeople you will ever have is nobody that you'll hire. It's your customer. So you need to produce authentic value for your customers. And then when they do that, then they're going to sell for you. Entrepreneurs are lucky, and I'm not lucky. Entrepreneurs make their luck. As Malcolm Gladwell talked about in his book, Outliers, he shows how these people like Bill Gates and Bill Joy and even the Beatles saw something changing. They saw an opportunity coming. And what they did is they said, well, that's going to happen at this point in time. Let's start now in the future. Let's start now and get our 10,000 hours in place so that when it happens, we can capitalize on this. So by anticipating where opportunities are and then putting the hard work in to be ready when they happen, you appear to be lucky, but it was your vision and it was your execution that made you successful and appear to be lucky. It wasn't just blind luck. The next one is, which is the name of my book, is about disciplined entrepreneurship, is there's a perception that entrepreneurs are undisciplined. And I can tell you this firsthand, this is off base, because I worked at IBM in the 1980s, which was the epitome of discipline. We had to wear, white starched shirts with ties every day. We had black suits and we wore black shoes and black socks, and we always were early for meetings, and we never said, a bad word in a meeting, and we never left before our boss. And then when I started my own company, I realized all that stuff did not matter very much at all. The only thing that mattered was, did our customers buy the product that we made, and did they pay for it and buy more? And why was I so clear-eyed about that where I wasn't before? Because we didn't make payroll unless they did that. If we dressed up well and were on time and said nice things all the time, that didn't mean we were selling products. Just like in a military operation, you have to know what your mission is, and then you have to have laser-like focus on that. So what great entrepreneurs, when you look at them, they might appear to you to be undisciplined in your definition, but in their world, they have incredible self-discipline, because if they don't, they won't survive. If you don't make payroll, you don't survive. So entrepreneurs are disciplined, incredible self-discipline. Two other misperceptions I just want to point out is entrepreneurs, they're unsuccessful almost all the time. And when I ask classes and people, groups, they say, oh, they're successful about 10% of the time. Well, I don't know exactly where that number comes from, but let me tell you, if you understand how to be a good entrepreneur, your success rate is many, many times higher than that. Our entrepreneurs today, as we measure them, are in business 5 years later, 75% of the time. Now, you can't just do that unless you understand and work hard and do that. But that's what this David versus Goliath visual is about. David is coming up against a giant Goliath, and everybody says he can't beat Goliath. He's so big. But what David does is David understands he needs to change the rules. The things have changed. He can now use this thing called a slingshot. And so when Goliath says, come out and fight me, he changes the rules. He says, I'm not going to come out and fight you the way you want. I'm going to fight by my rules. I'm changing the rules. And as soon as he changes the rules and starts using a slingshot, Goliath's biggest advantage, his size, his strength, becomes a liability, because now he's a bigger target for the slingshot. And he can't run around and catch David. And David fells Goliath. He defeats Goliath. And what Malcolm Gladwell shows in this book is that this isn't just true once in a while. It's true on a consistent basis. In military operations, if David knows what they're doing, they beat Goliath over 60% of the time. So it's not as hard. It's the odds are not as stacked. It's not a guarantee. There are no guarantees in life anymore, but it's not as bad as you think. The last thing is, I don't have an idea for a startup. Let me just say, the idea is the original idea is the single most overrated thing in entrepreneurship. It's just where you start. As my colleague Matt Marks showed, that's where great companies start, but then they focus on the customer and they do this thing called switchback until they figure out what the right thing is for the customer with the assets they have at this time and place, and what will they pay for. So the idea, yes, you need it, but then you got to figure out who the customer is, the market here, and then you have to execute against that with precision. And the most important thing is not even those two things, but it's, do you have a great team? Do you have a team that has a common vision, shared values, and complementary skills? So the original idea, once you start understanding the totality of entrepreneurship, it's the most overrated thing. Anybody can learn how to focus on customers, how to execute the process. And it's not as easy to build the team, but they can learn that. And those things are much more important than your original idea. So now when we think about teaching this, if that's what entrepreneurship is and what entrepreneurship is not, how should we think about teaching it? And I would tell you, we have to understand that it is not a science. Entrepreneurship will never be a science. We can't tell you if you do A and you do B and you do C, you are guaranteed to be successful. That's deterministic. That's science. That's like chemistry. That's like computer science. When I do things, I know the outcome if I do that. All we can do is tell you that, by the way, if you think about it, of course that can't be true, because once it's been done, entrepreneurship is doing something new the next time. So it can't be an algorithm to get you there, because it's, as soon as it's done, you have to do something else. It's always moving. So then someone might say, well, that makes it art. I don't like that term, because only a few people can do art. It's for elite people. I could never sing opera. I could never paint, probably many of you out there, but I'll tell you, every one of you could be an entrepreneur. So I would classify it as a craft, like pottery. And why do I classify it as a craft? Because anybody can do it. We build products, we build unique products, our end goal, and it's something that can be learned. We can teach you how to be better at pottery by, here's how you use your thumbs, here's how you spin the wheel, here's how you take it off, here's how you put it in the oven for how long, here's how you paint it. So you can get much better by learning those first principles. But again, it's not an algorithm. It's a craft, and that these help you increase your odds of success. And the last thing about a craft is it can't be learned in theory only. You have to have an apprenticeship model for it to succeed. And so once we understand that entrepreneurship is not a science, it's not art, it's a craft, it makes it much easier to teach. It resets our expectations. So how do we teach it? That was the last thing we were going to talk about. And so this is really what I want to talk about, that we've come to today and going forward in the future, and why it's so important. Just do a time check here, okay? To be a successful entrepreneur, we identify 4 fundamental characteristics that need to be covered, 4 dimensions. The first thing is, to be an entrepreneur, you have to have the heart. You have to have the spirit. The bird sings from within. If you don't have the mindset, if you don't have the will to be an entrepreneur, there's no class that can help you do that. So the first thing we do is we inculcate our students with, here's what entrepreneurship is, and here's why you want to go on this tough journey. And that starts with the theory, the point that, look, you know, the world's not perfect. It always needs to be fixed, and you're the one to fix it. So if all the fish are swimming this way, are you willing to be different? Are you willing to swim the other way? And do you get joy out of that? At MIT, we call this hacking the system. You know, we at MIT, we've been the outcasts. We've been the underdogs. It was Harvard that was the established people. And we at MIT were always kind of swimming to try to make things different, to hack the system, that creative irreverence to make it better. And we embed this right in our logo at the Trust Center. It's more fun to be a pirate than to join the Navy. Think about how you can change the world and make it better. You know, don't just go along with what is already there. Now, I know some of you might not feel comfortable with that in Japanese society. And there's not everyone. My parents didn't feel comfortable with that at first. But this is entrepreneurship, and we have to get people to understand that's what you are as an entrepreneur. You're willing to be different, and it's a great thing to be. So we talk about, you know, how glorious it is to be this kind of pirate, right? And we want you to have the spirit of a pirate, but you also must have the execution skills of a Navy SEAL to be successful. And that is the essence of disciplined entrepreneurship. The skills of a Navy SEAL, discipline. The spirit of a pirate, entrepreneurship, willing to be different. And it's this combination that makes for great entrepreneurship. So you must have that kind of understanding and that energy to go on this journey. So now I want to go on that journey. But now we have to give you the knowledge to be successful in that. We have to give you the equipment to do that. And that's what we teach in the classroom. This is the head. We have to get to the heart. That's where it starts. But we get to the head to say, here are the first principles for you to be successful at entrepreneurship. And this is what we teach in a rigorous manner, not just to be kind of, what's the shiny new book that just came out? We're looking at MIT at what's the body of knowledge that every entrepreneur should have? What is that toolbox that's been proven over time to work to make successful ventures. And here's the tools you need in your toolbox. And when new ones come along, we'll help verify them and put them in there. And this is where the rigor comes from in academia. It's rigor and relevance that we need to create it. So this is what we do in our disciplined entrepreneurship approach of 24 steps. We start with integrating what's often called design thinking, what's worked for Procter & Gamble, who's your customer, building back from there, very methodically. Then we talk about what can you do for your customer? What's your quantified value proposition? And then what makes you unique? All of these very systematically so anybody can go through and understand each step. And it's important to understand, while this is a sequential process, it's not a linear process. And there's lots of iterating going back and forth, as we talked about. And then even though we know who our customer is, and then what we can do for our customer, that we can create value for them. Remember, entrepreneurship is creating value, but also extracting value so that you're an economically sustainable entity. So the next step we need to understand is, how does our customer acquire the product? Again, a lot done at my previous company, IBM, and other places in how do customers think about this? What's the sales process built off? What's the decision-making unit? What's the decision-making process? And then once we have that, how do we price this? How do we come up with a business model? What's the lifetime value of a customer? This is called unit economics. And if that's how much they're worth, how do we get the channel to them that works? And then we come up with the channel. And then we build that product in a very efficient way with very fast clock speed, minimizing the investment and being very agile. And then we scale that business if it's an IDE. So all of this we've come through and put very rigorous kind of definitions to it and steps that people can go through. And that's what we put people through in the classroom. And it's turned out to be extraordinarily successful, as I talked about. But probably one of the things we didn't understand at first, it creates a common language to accumulate knowledge and to exchange knowledge throughout the community. And that's the theory behind entrepreneurship. So there's this mindset of this heart, spirit, there's this knowledge, but knowledge doesn't get it done in the real world. You have to turn that knowledge into capability. And that's where we go from theory to practice. And skill comes between the connection between the head and the hands. And this is fundamental to MIT. Its motto being mens et manus, mind and hand. So this is where we take knowledge and we teach it in the apprenticeship model, and we go back and forth between the theory and the practice. And I don't have time to go through this now, and you can go to our website, entrepreneurship.mit.edu, and see how we integrate the in-room classroom experience with the co-curriculars and extracurriculars to give you this theory and practice to get how you apply it so that you have both rigor in the theory and relevance in practice. And you go from not just being able to know what to do, the head, you can do it, the capability in your hands. And you know, this is really important, what universities, because people say, well, can't we teach that in the private sector? Can't we do that through places like Y Combinator, Techstars? And the answer is not nearly as effectively, because at universities like MIT and Kyushu and places like the Trust Center, we provide a safe space for our students who don't have just this simple linear path to become an entrepreneur. They'll start out working with some people on one idea, and that won't work, and that won't be the right match. And then they'll work with other people, or maybe they'll add somebody else to their team and they'll modify their idea. And then they go through this kind of safe space to become entrepreneurs. Multiple classes, multiple extracurricular activities. And this is what creates the ability to have an entrepreneur. Remember, the single necessary and sufficient condition for an entrepreneurial ecosystem is entrepreneurs. We at our university and your university focus on building entrepreneurs, not companies, because the entrepreneurs will produce the companies. Our job is to teach people how to fish. Our job is to provide that space where they can do it safely. And it's a customized journey for everyone. It's different, just like the results that come out are unique and different. So this is, I'm sorry, this is the first three H's, the heart, the head, the hand. And the last one, which is so important and underrated, is home. Entrepreneurship has been defined as the pursuit of opportunities with resources beyond our control. When I was at IBM, I was taught, here is your team, everybody works for you, they shouldn't work on anything else, command, control, and conquer. De-risk this. Don't depend on anybody else. Control it. In entrepreneurship, we work in communities because we need to share those resources. And it's a much more efficient model if I'll help somebody else on what I'm good at, and they don't even have to pay me. They don't have to send me to school because I'm good at it. As long as when I need something, they give me something in return. So this community-based distributed model, as opposed to command, control, and conquer, is a much more efficient and flexible model in most cases, and definitely when there's a lot of change. And this is the things that QSHU and QREC and the Martin Trust Center provide, and we could not be prouder of it because, you know, it's so needed in society. And so what's the future? The future of entrepreneurship education is producing and what we call anti-fragile people, anti-fragile teams, anti-fragile organizations. If we can teach people the heart, if we can teach people how to be different, if we can tell them, hey, you should embrace this, you know, spirit of a pirate. If they can give them the knowledge to be able and the hand and the head and the hand to be able to have the skills to adapt to these new environments where things are happening very, very quickly, and they can function in a community, then they're going to be able to thrive in times of instability, in rapid times of change. This is what we've seen. As I said, over the past 14 months, the interest in entrepreneurship has just gone up. Why? Because entrepreneurship took the chessboard and knocked it over. And the people who led in those times when nobody knew what to do were entrepreneurs. We know how to operate in periods of instability, uncertainty, adversity. That's what we're good at. Why are we good at it? Because we have the heart, the head, the hands, and the home, not to survive in those times, but to thrive. And that's what entrepreneurship education is moving towards. It's not just about startups. It's about entrepreneurs in big companies. It's about entrepreneurs in academic institutions. It's about entrepreneurs in government. It's about entrepreneurship in nonprofits. These are the people that we need to lead us because the rate of change is only going to get faster and faster and faster. I remember when the chief innovation officer at General Electric, good friend named Sue Siegel, who teaches for us now, and she said, you know, the rate of change has never gotten slower. It only gets faster. And we were all sitting in the audience. We said, oh, no. Trump was just elected president. This is crazy town. It's going to go back to normal. Well, if you think back to that, that was 2017. Things have not gotten slower. They only get faster and faster and faster. If you think this is the last pandemic, I think you know it is not. Will the next pandemic be worse? It could be much worse. Is there more climate change? Is there more social unrest? Is there more, the economic challenges? Is there more population growth? The rate of change is going to continue on and on. And so it is so important that we create more entrepreneurs in the world. It's incredibly important. We continue to teach management. Management is about how do we, de-risk things, optimize them, make predictable. But in a world where there's rapid change, the need for entrepreneurs is going up. And so I applaud the vision of Bob Huang. I applaud the implementation of Takata-san in putting together QREC. You could not be better positioned right now. 10 years have been incredibly exciting, and the next 10 years will only be more exciting and produce more and more dividends, not only to you, to you and your students, but to society and the global world and the global community. So with that, thank you so much for having me. And I turn it back over, I think on time here, unless we have time for questions.
Bill, thank you very much. どうもありがとうございました。それでは質問を受ける時間はちょっとあまりないようですので、大変恐縮ですけれども、またこのままプログラムを先に続けさせていただきたいと思います。Again, thank you so much, Bill. So please come to Japan after the COVID has settled down. Okay?
I would love to. And congratulations to you, Megumi, and everybody else.
Thank you.
ビル・オーレット教授、ありがとうございました。